Lesson 14, Processes, Part 1. Welcome to Lesson 14. In this lesson, we'll start to look at how processes support SIAM models and think about how processes are different in a SIAM environment. A process is defined in the SIAM process guides as a documented, repeatable approach to carrying out a series of tasks or activities. We're going to start our studies of processes by examining this definition in more detail and looking at what needs to be in place for a process to be effective. SIAM isn't a process, but each SIAM model will rely on processes to be effective. Processes are used when a task has to be repeated, or when a task is complex and steps need to be carried out in a particular order. You will have experienced business processes in your day-to-day life. For example, when you call your bank and are asked for security information, the bank's representative will be following their customer identification process. Think about other processes you interact with regularly. Does your organization use a lot of processes? Processes take inputs, perform activities, and create outputs. Let's think about processes in more detail with an exercise. Plan to spend 15 minutes on this exercise and don't forget to check out our suggested solution. This is a two-part exercise. It's a good idea to document processes. Try and make a note of 5 reasons why it's a good idea to document processes. For example, to allow staff to be trained to carry out the process. Then, note down what you think would be in a process description document. What information needs to be there for the document to be useful? Good luck. We've already studied some information about processes in earlier lessons in this course. For example, when we looked at SIAM roles and responsibilities, you learned about the role of the process owner. This role is accountable for the performance of the process. You learned that these roles might be supported by process managers, and you also learned that the roles can be combined when it makes sense. For example, one staff member might be the process owner for change, configuration, and release management. Processes are part of an organization's SIAM model. Processes can be more complex in a SIAM ecosystem because they span multiple organizations. Each SIAM model will contain a different mix of processes, depending on what is required to support the customer organization and service delivery. Go to your course downloads area and save a copy of the SIAM process guides that you will find in there, if you haven't done so already. This document describes some of the common processes that will be used in a SIAM ecosystem. It's not an exhaustive list, and it doesn't try and describe the processes in depth. If you want to learn more about a particular process, the SIAM and other practices lessons will help you identify where to start. The document does give you some SIAM considerations for each process, which are based on real-world experiences and can help you be more successful if you are implementing processes within a SIAM model. We'll be referring back to this document later in this lesson and also in the next lesson. Before we start to study individual processes, there are some common SIAM considerations that will be valid for every process in a SIAM ecosystem. We're going to study complexity, process ownership, toolset considerations, data and information considerations, process improvement. Let's start with complexity. The more complex a process is, the more challenging it can be to manage. SIAM ecosystems add complexity to processes for a number of reasons, including the fact that the processes span the SIAM layers, the increased number of organizations involved in the process, the need to integrate processes to support the end-to-end process, the number of process interactions between different organizations. It's a good idea to regularly review processes and make sure they are not unnecessarily complex. Simplifying processes as much as possible will make them easier to manage. Ownership of the end-to-end process is also a SIAM consideration that applies to all processes. Each layer in the SIAM ecosystem will have different accountabilities and responsibilities. The customer layer will always have ultimate accountability for the end-to-end process. The service integrator will be accountable for process design and their own local processes and procedures. The service providers will be accountable for their own local processes and procedures and for ensuring they comply with end-to-end process requirements. Toolset considerations within a SIAM ecosystem include which toolset or toolsets will support the processes. We studied this earlier when we looked at creating a tooling strategy. Each toolset option will have advantages and disadvantages. For example, using a toolset owned by an external service integrator might give the customer organization access to a best-of-breed toolset. Alternatively, continuing to use the customer's own toolset might mean setup time is shorter because the majority of the information has already been configured. Data and information considerations also need to be addressed for processes in a SIAM ecosystem. These will include: who owns the data? Does the customer organization have access to it if the relationship with an external organization ends? Who owns the intellectual property for artifacts like knowledge articles? Is data and information consistent between toolsets? How is access to shared data, information, and tools controlled? And how are security standards maintained? How will any compliance and assurance requirements be managed? All of these considerations should be addressed early in the SIAM roadmap and agreed when contracts are put in place. Finally, within the SIAM model, it's important to define who is responsible for process improvement. Processes will evolve over time, and it's important to work proactively to identify where processes can be made more efficient and effective. Each party in the SIAM ecosystem will be accountable for improving their own processes. They will also contribute towards end-to-end process improvement facilitated by the service integrator. We're going to end this lesson by asking you to carry out some individual study of the SIAM process considerations. In your exam, you will only be examined on the purpose of each process and the SIAM considerations for that process. We are also required to study 3 processes in more depth, which we'll do in the next lesson. We'll use a structured exercise to help you learn about the SIAM process considerations. To complete this exercise, you will need to set aside at least an hour in total, but we would recommend that you break your studies up into sections so that you don't get overloaded with process information. To help you put some context to your studies, why not start with the processes in the Ceylon Ordnance case study? There are 5 processes for you to start with. For each process, find the process purpose in the process guides document. Identify how it can help Ceylon Ordnance operate more effectively. For example, better knowledge management might help the IT staff fix things more quickly and improve the relationship between them and the web sales technical staff. Then, look at the SIAM considerations for each process at Ceylon Ordnance. Which ones do you think will be relevant if Ceylon Ordnance goes ahead with its SIAM transformation? You could also think about the impact that Ceylon Ordnance's poor project management capabilities might have on the SIAM transformation. Once you have finished looking at the processes in place at Ceylon Ordnance, make your way through the rest of the process guides and create your own version of the purpose and SIAM considerations for each process. Think about how you learn best and structure your output accordingly. You could, for example, put the information into a table to print out and display in your study area. Present some of the information to a colleague and describe how it is relevant for your organization. Create a mind map or a cartoon for each process. Document which processes are in place in your organization and if they are effective, and reflect the process purpose defined in the process guides. Your exam paper will contain up to 7 questions about the processes that support SIAM, so complete this task carefully. Our tutors can review your output if you need any help or support. There's no quiz at the end of this lesson. We'll test you on this material in the quiz at the end of Lesson 15. That's the end of Lesson 14. In the next lesson, we will choose 3 processes to study in depth. Make sure you spend sufficient time studying the processes and thinking about the SIAM considerations.